Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Tuesday. A gray, overcast, raw Tuesday, but still Tuesday all the same, and that is Tag Tuesday. We all do tags, and there is one there are a few that are going around. I haven't been tagged in any of them because nobody likes me because I smell. But there's one going around that is a BookTube tradition. I've seen it on a whole bunch of channels. It's the end of the year book tag. This will be the 2022 edition. It's only a few questions, but I thought we'd go through it today. It was created originally by Ariel Bissett in the 1850s. Boy, how time flies. And the first prompt is, are there any books you started this year that you need to finish? And that doesn't really apply to me. I have fallen into the habit, especially in the last 10 years, 15 years, of reading books more or less in one sitting. I don't usually let them sit partially read. So no, in a technical sense, no. Although between now and the end of the year, there are a handful of books I need to reread. Definitely. Books that are rattling around in my head, something like the books of Jacob, something where I feel certain that I will benefit from a nice, loving reread. There are books like that. But it's an informal list. I will wait for paperback releases, or I'll check journals later on in early November. Then the next prompt is, do you have an autumnal book you transition to at the end of the year? And I don't. I am mostly, in my reading life, I'm mostly tied to new releases in the U.S. book market. I do a whole bunch of rereading and a whole bunch of books from used bookstores, but most of what I read is that. And the only the prompt makes it sound like I have a book that I return to over and over again in the autumn, and I have a few, but not because it's the autumn. They just happen to be tagged to that month. It's not so much me having an autumnal rhythm as it is the publishing industry having an autumnal rhythm, because the publishing industry in the autumn in the U.S. swings into high gear with lots and lots more serious books, lots and lots of more histories and biographies and whatnot. And if I'm going to cover the dock side, if I'm going to cover this beat, I need to be ready for that. Then the next prompt is there a new release you're still waiting for? Then the prompt after that is, what are 3 books you want to read before the end of the year? And then the prompt after that is there a book you think could still shock you and become a favorite book of the year? As usual, when I do this tag, I'm going to answer all 3 of those at the same time, because they're all basically saying what books are still on your TBR. If you didn't think that a book had the power to surprise and shock you, it wouldn't be on your TBR, I don't think. So I made a brief list here. There are a lot of books I still need to get to this year, but I made a brief list to show you. The first one we'll do here is Leila Philipp. This is Beaverland, How One Weird Rodent Made America. And this is a forthcoming book about, I would imagine, the 2 gigantic roles that beavers played. When this book says made America, there are 2 ways that can apply. One is that the beavers were the catastrophic subjects of a near genocidal hunt for their pelts. And that commerce very much helped to make America. That was enormous, absolutely enormous, and caused the death of millions of beavers. But there's another way in which beavers made America, and that is, of course, the way they reshaped the land. They are natural geoengineers. So they make America in terms of valleys, waterways, the course of rivers, and a lot of that has been studied. So I'm fascinated by this subject anyway. I've met beavers in the wild many, many, many times. Not particularly the most charismatic of animals, but it was always fun to see. And I have also examined their handiwork up close. Then just one other book here. This is by R.A.J. Waddingham, and this is winningly called Breakspear. And it's the story of the only Englishman ever to become Pope. The story of his rise from nothing, probably from illegitimacy, to becoming Pope Adrian IV. I don't think that I remember any other popular biography of this figure, so it's going to be fascinating. He was in the reign of Henry II, so there'll be a lot of history involved there that I hope will be done really well. Then this next one is by Jeremy Hart, and it is called Cloven Country, The Devil in the English Landscape. What a cover. And this is basically about how every inch of English soil has some sort of supernatural resonance soaked in deep. And I guess this thing will examine all kinds of folkways and folk cultures and whatnot. I don't know. Off the top of my head, I don't remember how long it is, but I don't think it's very long. I think it's the sort of the publishing standard 230 something pages, which means that it necessarily will be a tiny little skimming of the subject. You could write a 1,000-page book about every county. So it, it'll, in other words, a large amount will depend on what an entertaining writer Jeremy Hart is. I don't think I've ever read him, but I'm interested in the subject, so we will see. Then this next one is by Fred Kaplan, who I have read and reviewed. A very, very good, very engaging historian and biographer. And his new book is on Thomas Jefferson, only Thomas Jefferson as a writer. It's called His Masterly Pen. Of all the adjectives that you could use, you could have picked any other adjective in the world, and you used the one with master in it. Now, I have to assume that that's intentional, and that maybe the title is grim, a little bit of grim irony. We shall see. But I'm always up for it. Almost every time that I read a book where a biographer looks at a figure through their writing, I am pleased. Almost every time that happens. So I've read two outstanding examples, one for Theodore Roosevelt and one especially for Winston Churchill, that just were amazing. So and Fred Kaplan already has a huge amount of credit in the Bank of Steve. This next one is by Jonathan Lear, and it's called Imagining the End, Mourning and Ethical Life. I know this is going to be a little bit macabre, and we'll move right on from this, but I'm actually a big fan of studies of mourning, what mourning is, what grief is, and maybe what the author thinks about it, or historical overviews or whatnot. Jonathan Lear is a very good writer, so I imagine that this will be very, very enjoyable, despite how grim the subject is. Talk about grim subject matters, but I never miss it. If you are like me, just a voracious reader and historically inclined, then I consider it kind of my duty to keep up with what's being written about the historical eras that I lived through, especially if I was also writing through them. If I was commenting on them at the time, however small fry, then I feel behooved to read all those books. It's the same thing with COVID-19 books. We lived through that history. How on earth could I call myself a fan of reading about history if I didn't read everything about COVID-19? Or even Donald Trump, America's first openly fascist president, someone who organized and launched a violent insurrection to overthrow the government. That's for it. No matter how horrifying it is, it's history. So I will be reading everything about it. And the same thing is true of Ronnie Reagan. This is William Inboden. This is The Peacemaker, his new book about Ronald Reagan. An unfortunate choice of cover photo, but it'll make some very old Reagan haters hope that those blades take his head off. But I've read this author before. We will see. I know I've read this author before, and more importantly, I unlike, for instance, with the supernatural history of England, when it comes to this subject, I know everything that the author knows. I was paying very, very close attention. 2 editions of 4 newspapers a day. And I've read since everything that has been written. So in the first 5 pages of this thing, I will know, is this dumb? Those of you who read a lot of history will know what I mean. Plenty of it is just dumb. The last 2 biographies of Queen Elizabeth II, just dumb. You can tell right away that they're just dumb. The author is just showing up. That's all. Just spinning plates. There's nothing serious here going on. You can tell that very quickly. Unlike a lot of the rest of you who maybe are history fans and discern that about a book right away, I don't feel like I'm able to put it down after that. I can open it, realize in a few pages that this is dumb, and then I still feel like I have to read it. So I'll know pretty quickly what this is, whether or not this is a serious work on Reagan. There have been some. Okay, this next one is a big picture book. Can't wait to get my hands on it. This is, I don't remember who published this. The writer is Ryan Hughes, and it's Ray Guns and Rocket Ships. And this is a gigantic picture book tour of vintage science fiction cover art, which doesn't feel quite so vintage to me because I've read a lot of these books. Probably 60% of the books that will be in this book are things that I probably read with those covers once upon a time at a metal spinner rack at a dry goods store. But this is going to be so much fun. And I'm hoping the best of these kinds of books, in addition to being just look at that fun or oh, I remember that fun, also involve a bit of literary detective work, which would be great. It would be great if Ryan Hughes fills this book with biographies of the little known artists who made these covers, maybe uncovers who did what work and when and where it all is now. That would be really fantastic. I'm hoping. I'm certainly hoping. The neat thing about it is that I'm okay. I'm good either way. If it's just a visual tour of the covers, I'm still going to enjoy it. This next one, I think we saw this on this channel. This is by Sean Biffell, Remainders of the Day. This is just the next in his series of books about being the owner and operator of a small bookshop. I've read all the rest of these, and they're quite good. They're weird and strange and a little bit lazy, but they're quite interesting, especially if you have either, like me and like all the rest of you, spent a lot of time in bookshops, or like me and like some of the rest of you, worked in bookshops. I've done both, so these things can't help but interest me. Then this next one, this is, again, I'm going to try not to rant. I'm going to try not to rant. This is a new deluxe edition of the Silmarillion, which is the legendarium undergirding the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. And this is by J.R.R. Tolkien, has the die-cast cover and whatnot, and it has Tolkien's illustrations. Last year, I think it's Houghton Mifflin, did a companion volume to this, a big, beautiful edition of Lord of the Rings with Tolkien's illustrations, the very first volume like that had the author's own artwork all throughout it in liberally spaced in full color. And this is the Silmarillion doing the same thing. So just like last year when that big illustrated Lord of the Rings came out, and I showed it to you on this channel, and I said every serious Tolkien fanatic has to have this. Just like that, now this. Everyone's going to have this Silmarillion. And I'm not going to rant about the Rings of Power. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not even going to mention the details of the last episode to air. I have seen all kinds of Amazon funded shills on social media saying this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. This is the greatest TV show that's ever existed. I'm naming my kids Rings and Power and Of. I've seen those people. I simply refuse to believe that anyone holds that opinion without being paid, without being coerced, who has watched these episodes. They are incomprehensibly bad. But there's always Tolkien. Right? You can always go back to Tolkien. And then this next one, this is also going back. I haven't read this thing since it first came out. This is Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. There's a big new deluxe edition coming out. May even be the 30th anniversary. I would hate to think that, because that would make me very old. But this is an absolutely seminal so-called cyberpunk novel that I haven't read in. Well, it was a little mass market paperback, it's a big book. I read this probably when it first came out, so this would be 30 years ago, but I really, really enjoyed it and could very much stand to read it again. This is a good example. It's not a new release, but it's a good example of one of those books where the minute I saw it, I thought, I bet I will profit from a reread of that book. I bet I will. So it's coming out in a big deluxe edition. Then we have a romance novel. You can't forget the romance novels. This is by Christina Britton. This is called Some Dukes Have All the Luck. And there they are. You can tell it's a modern Regency romance. You have the ornate background and the fireplace and whatnot and the gorgeous gown. All of those things fit with the traditional Regency romance, but he doesn't have a shirt on and he's taking her clothes off. And this is about a wastrel duke who is not married and does not want to be married, but he runs a gaming establishment that's just awful. It ruins people's lives and whatnot. So he knows from doing that marriage is, all the sots that he gets in his gaming facility all went to the author and swore snow pure devotion to their wives. So he is just a total cynic on the institution of marriage, but he has young wards that he has to take care of, and he knows that he's not suited for it at all. So hence enter the woman, and then sparks fly, and as usual they will end up realizing they belong together. It'll be a mass market paperback, and I will love it, I'm sure. Then we have something by Sarah Gristwood. I think we saw this on this channel. This is Tutors in Love. A new book with a very perilous title. I would argue that what we understand as the phenomenon of being in love may have happened to one or two of the tutors, but love, not in love, but love, I don't think ever happened to any of them. So we will see what Sarah Gristwood has to say. Again, it's with the tutors more so even than with Ronald Reagan. The whole question is going to be, is this good or is this dumb? And I don't mean that Sarah Gristwood is dumb. I mean that it's very easy in today's market, if you have a good relationship with your publisher, it's very easy to roll up to them with a book proposal and just be dumb. Not do any serious work, not do any serious historical work, or even any serious historical thinking. That's entirely possible to do. It happens all too often. So we'll have to see. As with Ronald Reagan, so too with the tutors, I will know instantly what I'm dealing with. But I'm going to give it a try, definitely. And then we'll finish up with, this is by Alessandro Galenzi. I think I might have shown you this already. This is Written in Water, a book about, there's poor John Keats dying and this is a book about his final months and probably his death, which is excruciatingly documented, and then, his aftermath. There was a book written very much along these lines about 30 years ago. I'm forgetting the name of it, but it also had, I think it had the same kind of cover, the famous sketch of Keats dying on his bed. But I'm still going to read it, right? It's the same thing, the same point I made with a lot of other books on this list, is that I don't require authors to reinvent the wheel. I don't require anything like that. I just need them to, if they're going to cover old ground, I need them to do it with energy, and I need them to interest me. They don't even have to uncover new stuff. I just want them to interest me. I want them to bring their A game, and it's entirely possible this author does, so I will give it a try. So that's just a handful of the books that answer those three prompts together. Things I'm looking forward to, things I still have to read, things that could still shock me and be amazing. That's just a handful. There are plenty of others. Because what I just showed you is less than a week's of reading for me. There's a lot of other stuff coming out. I didn't want this video to go on forever. But that takes care of three prompts in a row and brings us to the end, the last prompt, which is, have you already started making reading plans for 2023? And I have not, just because of personal preference. I don't make plans for the new year while I'm still in the old year of any kind, not just reading, but anything else. So I don't carry over from one year to the other. I stop. At the end of every year, I stop. So I don't know. In this position, I'm not so much making plans, it's just sort of fantasizing. If I'm still here, if I still care about reading, if I'm still involved with books, what will I do in 2023? Imagine that in that purely hypothetical scenario, I will return to BookTube. And I imagine that if I do that, there'll be a whole bunch of things that I want to do, a whole bunch of reading plans. Most of my reading plans will be, I would imagine, the same. My reading plans right now are split three ways. One is my profession, which is also my passion. I deeply, deeply love keeping my hands on the new release market in the US book market. The new releases in the 15 or 16 genres that I love, reading as many of them as I can, keeping abreast, just barely, of what's coming out in that field. That's one. And then two is riding with serendipity, riding with happenstance at used bookstores, like, for instance, the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, and taking what it gives me and saying, I would like to add this to the list and reread it this week. That's tremendous amounts of fun. And that X factor, that's the only X factor involved in the first factor with the new release market in America, is whether or not the book will be surprisingly great. Not whether or not it's coming out. I will already know ahead of time what's on the horizon. So there's no element of discovery there. Usually not. There's very little element of discovery. Whereas at the Brattle Bookshop, I never know what I'm going to find. So and I never know what's going to call on me to read it right then, to reread it right then. And then the third element, though, is BookTube. I am a booktuber. I am a booktuber. So. And I'm whether or not people hate me because I smell, I am deeply invested in the BookTube community. So I will allow a great deal of my reading plans to be shaped by BookTube in 2023. What read-alongs will there be? What great groups will there be? if I am back and things are as they are now, then I'm sure that that's what will happen, and I couldn't be happier about that. So that is the end of the year book tag. All that's left for me to do is tag people, but everybody hates me, so they didn't tag me. So why should I tag anybody? If you haven't done this and you have plans for the rest of the year, I of course want to hear about them. I of course want to hear what it is that's still on your docket that you haven't got to yet this year, or what might be coming out this year that intrigues you. I of course want to know that, so feel free to do this tag. Consider yourself tagged. And anyway, I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.